What happens when Hollywood royalty, a man who's spent decades commanding screens with intensity and intelligence, who's built a career spanning over 150 films on being undeniably excellent at his craft, who's earned respect through consistent brilliance rather than demanding it, who's become one of the highest-grossing actors in cinema history, not through luck but through relentless dedication to excellence, sits down for what should be routine morning television promotion only to encounter a host who mistakes familiarity for license to disrespect. When someone whose presence carries weight earned through 40 years of exceptional work, someone who's worked with every major director in Hollywood, someone who's created characters that have become part of American cultural vocabulary. Meet someone who confuses hosting a morning show with having earned the right to question another man's relevance based solely on the number of years he's been alive when a promotional appearance meant to celebrate current work, to discuss a new film that proves continued excellence and relevance, becomes an ambush questioning whether you should even still be working, whether your age somehow negates your talent, whether time itself has made you obsolete regardless of what you continue to accomplish. What you're about to witness is not just another awkward television moment that gets forgotten by the next news cycle, not just another celebrity getting offended by a question and making it into social media drama, not just another instance where an interview went sideways because of miscommunication or poor phrasing. This is the moment Samuel L. Jackson, a living legend whose body of work speaks louder than any introduction could capture, whose talent has never been questioned by anyone who actually understands cinema, whose dedication to his craft has made him one of the most respected actors of his generation and a role model for aspiring performers across every demographic, decided that some things matter more than promotional obligations, that dignity isn't negotiable regardless of cameras or audience size or network importance, and that walking away from disrespect with your head held high is sometimes the most powerful statement you can make, more impactful than any argument or defense could ever be. The entertainment industry runs on relationships, on playing the game, on maintaining connections even when you'd rather speak truth. Actors promote films they don't believe in, smile through insulting questions, laugh at jokes at their expense, all because that's how it works, and burning bridges has consequences. The unwritten rule is clear when you're a guest on someone's show. You take whatever they dish out with grace, because fighting back makes you look difficult, defensive, like someone who can't take a joke or takes themselves too seriously. Network television especially operates on this dynamic. Hosts have the power. Guests are there at their pleasure, and challenging that hierarchy publicly is considered career suicide by the risk-averse publicists and agents who manage celebrity appearances. But what happens when someone decides that some lines can't be crossed regardless of consequences? When a man who's achieved everything possible in his field decides that one more film promotion isn't worth sitting there while someone diminishes his life's work? When dignity becomes non-negotiable, even when everyone around you is signaling that you should just let it go, just laugh it off, just finish the segment and deal with it privately later. Good Morning America had booked Samuel for what should have been straightforward and mutually beneficial for everyone involved. He'd promote his latest action film, share some entertaining behind-the-scenes stories that would make good social media clips, maybe discuss his decades in the industry with the kind of appreciative retrospective tone that celebrates longevity rather than questioning it. And everyone would go home happy with content that served both the film's marketing needs and the show's need for compelling segments. Standard morning television fare that had worked thousands of times before with thousands of other actors. A formula so reliable it barely required thought. The film he was promoting deserved better than what it was about to get. It was a well-crafted thriller that gave him a role with actual depth. Not just another paycheck part, but something he'd chosen specifically because it challenged him in interesting ways. At 75 years old, he was still being offered leading roles in major productions, still considered bankable by studios who knew his name on a poster meant millions in revenue, still capable of carrying an action film while also delivering the kind of nuanced performance that reminded people he wasn't just an action star but a genuinely talented actor who trained at prestigious institutions and paid his dues in theater before Hollywood ever noticed him. The movie had tested well, the studio was optimistic, and this Good Morning America appearance was supposed to be the kind of high-profile mainstream exposure that translates directly to ticket sales. Samuel's publicist had negotiated the appearance carefully, as they always did, running through the expected topics: the film's plot, working with the director, any funny stories from the set, maybe touching on his upcoming projects, the standard promotional interview checklist that protects both the guest and the show from unexpected drama, what Michael Strahan called asking honest questions and keeping it real. Samuel would soon demonstrate was simply age-based dismissal disguised as curiosity, suggesting someone should stop working not because their work had declined, Not because they'd become unreliable or difficult, not because they couldn't deliver anymore, but simply because they'd been doing it for a long time. Questioning someone's continued relevance as if longevity itself was somehow suspicious rather than admirable. As if decades of consistent excellence somehow meant you'd overstayed your welcome rather than earned the right to keep doing what you love and what you're still exceptionally good at. What Michael fundamentally failed to understand, what people who've achieved fame through athletics and charm, rather than decades of craft excellence, sometimes don't grasp, was that you don't question a legend's right to keep working when that legend is still delivering excellent performances, still choosing interesting projects, still bringing measurable value to everything he touches. You especially don't do it on live television under the guise of honest conversation, as if rudeness becomes journalism when you frame it as saying what everyone's supposedly thinking. The question itself, at your age, how much longer can you keep doing this, carried multiple layers of disrespect that anyone with awareness would recognize. It implied that age itself was disqualifying regardless of current ability. It suggested that Samuel's continued work required justification rather than celebration. It positioned the host as someone with authority to question whether a legend should still be working, as if a morning show hosting gig gave someone that kind of standing. And perhaps most insultingly, it treated Samuel's presence as an opportunity to create a moment rather than to actually honor his work and his continued contributions to cinema. This isn't about whether age is a legitimate topic of discussion, whether actors face real career challenges as they get older in an industry that often values youth over experience, whether discussing Hollywood ageism has value in broader conversations about how we treat aging in American culture. Those are all valid topics that could be explored respectfully, thoughtfully, in ways that acknowledge the complexity rather than reducing someone to a number. This is about the difference between respectful inquiry and dismissive questioning, between asking someone about navigating age in Hollywood and essentially asking, when are you going to quit because you're old? Between treating a guest with the respect their achievements deserve and treating them like their continued presence requires justification to someone who hasn't earned the authority to demand it. Michael Strahan thought he was being bold, asking the question everyone thinks but doesn't say out loud, pushing past the polite PR boundaries that he felt made morning television too soft and unchallenging, demonstrating that he wasn't going to just lob softballs like some hosts who were content to let celebrities coast through promotional appearances without any real engagement. In his mind, he was doing real journalism, asking tough questions, being willing to create uncomfortable moments if that's what honest conversation required. But what he was calling boldness was actually just rudeness given a thin justification. What he was calling honest questioning was actually ageist dismissal dressed up as curiosity. What he was calling journalism was actually just a host drunk on his own platform's power, confusing the authority that came from sitting behind that desk with personal authority he hadn't remotely earned through his actual accomplishments. Michael's path to that Good Morning America hosting chair had been unusual professional football career, then retirement, then a surprisingly successful transition into television where his charm and relatability had made him a natural fit for morning show work. He'd found his second act, carved out a new identity beyond athletics, and deserved credit for successfully navigating that difficult transition that defeats so many former athletes. But somewhere in that success, perhaps in the constant positive feedback from audiences who loved his everyman energy, perhaps in the way celebrities typically deferred to him as the host, perhaps in the platform itself and the power it conferred, Michael had developed a blind spot. He'd started to believe that his hosting position gave him the authority to question anyone about anything, that creating moments mattered more than respecting guests, that being provocative was the same thing as being substantive. He'd apparently forgotten or perhaps never fully understood that hosting a morning show is a privilege granted by the network and can be revoked. While Samuel L. Jackson's status as a legend was earned through decades of undeniable excellence and couldn't be questioned by anyone who understood what actual achievement looked like. The hierarchy Michael imagined, where his role as host put him in a position to judge whether Samuel should still be working, was completely inverted from reality. Samuel was Hollywood royalty agreeing to appear on Michael's show as a favor to the network and the film's marketing needs. Michael should have been honored to have him, grateful for his time, respectful of his accomplishments. Instead, Michael treated the appearance as an opportunity to create a viral moment at Samuel's expense. And when Samuel L. Jackson, who'd faced every possible challenge in his decades-long career, who'd earned his legendary status through talent and work ethic rather than just fame, who understood exactly what was happening and why it was wrong, decided he wasn't going to sit there and validate this line of questioning with his presence. What unfolded wasn't just a walk-off. It was a masterclass in knowing your worth. refusing to accept disrespect regardless of context, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful response to being diminished is simply refusing to participate. Buckle up. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a clash, it's a reminder that respect isn't automatically owed to anyone with a microphone, that legends don't need to justify their continued excellence to people who've never approached their level of achievement, and that walking away with dignity beats staying and fighting for respect that should have been given freely. The Good Morning America studio hummed with familiar morning energy crew members moving efficiently through practiced routines that had been perfected over thousands of episodes. Cameras positioned precisely to capture every angle the directors might need. Lights adjusted with professional precision to create that warm, welcoming atmosphere that morning television requires to combat the natural grogginess of early viewers. Everything gleamed with the polish of a well-funded network production. Floors reflecting the studio lights with mirror-like shine, every surface suggesting professional competence, and the kind of money that ABC's parent company Disney could afford to spend on their flagship morning program. The smell of coffee and breakfast foods wafted from the craft services table where crew members grabbed quick fuel between segments. Production assistants checked and rechecked equipment with the nervous energy of people who knew that live television forgave no mistakes. In the control booth, producers reviewed the segment rundown one more time, timing calculated to the second, commercial breaks planned, backup topics prepared in case the interview went long or short. The audience filed in with that particular excitement that comes from being present for live television tourists visiting New York, making this a highlight of their trip. Locals who'd gotten tickets months ago, all settling into their seats with phones silenced and expectations high for the kind of entertaining morning television that Good Morning America had delivered reliably for decades. Samuel L. Jackson arrived with the calm assurance of someone who'd done this particular dance countless times. Dark suit perfectly tailored by someone who understood how fabric should drape on a body that, despite his age, he'd kept in impressive shape through discipline and training that put men half his age to shame. Presence immediately commanding without requiring any performance or artifice. The natural authority that comes from 40 years of being undeniably excellent at what you do and knowing that your reputation precedes you into every room you enter. He moved through the pre-show preparations with practiced ease, born of hundreds of similar appearances, makeup touch-ups applied by professionals who knew exactly what the harsh studio lights required. Sound technicians attaching his microphone pack with efficient professionalism. Producers greeting him warmly and going over the expected segment topics one final time to make sure everyone was on the same page about what this appearance was supposed to accomplish. He nodded politely to staff members who approached him with that combination of professional courtesy and genuine fan work that famous people learn to navigate gracefully. Signed a few autographs for crew members during a quiet moment. Exchanged pleasantries with Robin Roberts, who'd always been professional and kind in their previous interactions. Everything suggested this would be another smooth, professional promotional appearance. Get in, talk about the film, share a few laughs, get out, easy, routine. Exactly what his publicist had promised when they'd agreed to book this slot. He settled into his chair on the set, expecting this would be another routine promotional appearance, perhaps even an enjoyable one. The Good Morning America team had a good reputation. Robin was universally respected. George brought gravitas from his political journalism background. Even Michael, whose background was less traditional for a journalist, had generally proven competent and charming in the segments Samuel had seen. There was no reason to expect anything different from the hundreds of other morning show appearances he'd done over his career. He was there to discuss his latest film, an action thriller he was genuinely proud of, something he'd chosen specifically because it challenged him in interesting ways despite what some might call the action star label. It should have been fun, easy. 15 minutes of entertainment and promotion before moving on with his day. Michael Strahan greeted him with that trademark grin, the charm that had made him a morning television star after his football career ended. Moving through the space with the confidence of someone who'd found success in this second act and believed it gave him license to push boundaries. Robin Roberts sat radiating her characteristic warmth. George Stephanopoulos reviewing notes with his usual careful preparation. Together they formed the morning show machine that America had come to trust. Friendly, professional, reliably entertaining without being threatening. The countdown began. The lights intensified. 3, 2, 1, they were live. Broadcasting to millions across the country, settling into their morning routines, expecting nothing more dramatic than weather forecasts and cooking segments. Good morning, America. Michael's voice boomed with practiced enthusiasm. Joining us today, the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Applause rippled through the studio. Samuel smiled, nodding in acknowledgement, looking comfortable and at ease. This was familiar territory, no different from hundreds of other morning show appearances across his career. Michael leaned in with that friendly host energy, eyes sparkling with what looked like genuine appreciation. So, Sam, your new movie, man? It's wild. Explosions, fights, you doing stunts, you're running, jumping, doing all kinds of crazy stuff out there. Samuel chuckled, settling into the expected banter. Yeah, I still got a few moves left in me. And then Michael dropped it. The question that would change everything, delivered with that same easy tone that made it land even harder. At your age, though, how much longer can you keep doing that? For a split second that somehow seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing moved. The question hung in the air, sharp and awkward and wrong in a way that made everyone in the studio unconsciously tense, the way people's bodies react to danger before their conscious minds have fully processed what's happening. It was like watching a glass vase teeter on the edge of a table, everyone seeing it start to fall, knowing what was coming, but powerless to stop the inevitable crash. Robin's smile flickered, the professional mask slipping for just a fraction of a second to reveal genuine shock and concern underneath. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed slightly as she processed what Michael had just said, her brain clearly racing through calculations about how to redirect this before it became a disaster. George glanced down at his papers with the sudden intensity of someone desperately wishing they could disappear, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested he recognized this had just crossed a line, but wasn't sure yet what to do about it. A single cough from the audience cut through the sudden silence, one of those involuntary sounds that happens when tension makes it hard to breathe normally. When the atmospheric pressure in a room seems to shift and people's bodies respond to the stress even before they consciously understand what's wrong. In the control booth, producers leaned closer to their monitors, hands hovering over various controls, unsure whether this was just an awkward moment that would pass or the beginning of something worse. The director's voice came through headsets with urgent concern. What the hell is he doing? But there was no good answer, no procedure for this exact situation, no playbook for when your host decides to insult a legendary guest on live television. Samuel's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone watching closely enough, which everyone in America suddenly was. The warmth that had characterized his demeanor since arriving at the studio drained from his face like water through a suddenly opened drain, replaced by something cooler, harder, more focused, the look of someone who'd just recognized disrespect but was calculating how to respond, weighing options, considering consequences, deciding in real time how much this moment was worth and what it would cost. His eyes narrowed just enough for the camera to catch it, the muscles around them tightening in a micro-expression that body language experts would later analyze frame by frame when this clip went viral. It was the look of someone who'd just been slapped but was maintaining enough control not to immediately slap back. Someone who understood that how he responded in the next few seconds would define how this moment was remembered and talked about for years to come. The cameramen, trained to capture every angle of every moment, instinctively zoomed in slightly, their professional instincts recognizing that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't quite articulate what yet. The lighting in the studio seemed to somehow change. Though no one had touched any controls, it was just that the emotional temperature had shifted so dramatically that it affected how everyone perceived everything. The way a room full of laughter looks different from a room full of tension, even if the physical lighting hasn't changed at all. My age, Samuel repeated slowly, and the two words carried more weight than entire paragraphs could have conveyed. His voice was smooth on the surface but edged with steel underneath, like velvet wrapped around a blade, soft enough to touch but sharp enough to cut if you pressed too hard. I didn't realize there was an expiration date on passion. The laughter that followed wasn't real. It was thin, forced, the kind that fills uncomfortable silence instead of expressing genuine amusement. People were laughing because they didn't know what else to do with the tension suddenly filling the room. Robin jumped in quickly, her voice gentle, clearly trying to redirect towards safer ground. I think what Michael means is that you've been doing this for so long and you still bring that incredible energy. How do you keep that going? But Michael waved her off with a half laugh, his tone slipping towards something more aggressive, more convinced of his own cleverness. No, I meant what I said. I mean, Sam's been in the game, what, 40 years, 50? You gotta start thinking about slowing down at some point, right? You could feel the room change physically, the brightness seeming to dim, the energy thickening with discomfort. George shifted in his chair uneasily. Robin's hand twitched toward Michael's arm as if to stop him, but it was already too late. Samuel sat back, silent for a beat too long, the kind of pause that makes everyone nervous because they can feel something building underneath. His jaw tightened. The cameras caught the flicker of emotions crossing his face, disbelief, anger, restraint, all competing for expression. The first real crack had appeared in the pleasant morning television facade. It was small, almost invisible to casual viewers, but once it was there, everyone who understood what was actually happening could see it clearly. Something was coming, and no amount of practiced charm or professional smoothing over could stop it now. The tension hummed low, quiet, dangerous. Every person on set felt it. Even if no one wanted to acknowledge it out loud yet, the pleasant promotional interview had become something else entirely, and there was no going back to what it had been 30 seconds earlier. The silence stretched until it started to feel alive, humming with barely contained energy. Every eye in the studio locked on Samuel L. Jackson, waiting for his response, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. He remained still, unnervingly still, his fingers resting lightly on his knee, his voice low when it finally emerged. "You know, Michael," he said slowly, every syllable deliberate and weighted. "I've been doing this for decades. I've earned my place here." His tone wasn't loud, didn't need to be it sliced through the air sharper than any shout. The kind of calm that makes people lean forward without realizing it because they recognize they're hearing something important. Michael laughed too loud, too forced. The sound of someone who didn't recognize the warning being issued. "Come on, Sam. You know what I mean. You're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." The words might have sounded light in his head, but delivered with that smirk, they became something uglier, casual dismissal of a legendary career based solely on the number of years it had spanned. Robin's hand twitched again, her discomfort visible. George glanced toward the control booth where producers stood frozen behind glass, not daring to intervene but clearly recognizing this was going wrong. The morning show brightness seemed to dim, the cheerful atmosphere replaced by a tension that felt heavy, almost oppressive. Samuel didn't smile. His eyes, usually so full of life and humor, narrowed slightly, the rhythm of his voice changing to something lower, steadier, harder. "I know exactly what you mean," he said, leaning forward just enough for the camera to catch the sharpness in his gaze. "But I'm not sure you do." The air felt electric now. A few nervous laughs from the audience faded almost instantly, replaced by the kind of silence that comes when people recognize they're witnessing something uncomfortable and real rather than scripted entertainment. Michael kept going, apparently convinced his platform gave him license to continue, smiling like he was immune to the chill settling around him. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've had an amazing run. Man, 40, 50 years, that's a hell of a career, but at some point, you gotta start thinking about passing the torch, right?" Robin cut in quickly, her voice tight but kind, clearly trying to salvage this. "What we're trying to ask—" "No, Robin," Michael interrupted without even looking at her. "I'm asking a real question here." His voice hardened, abandoning charm for something more aggressive. "At what point do you look in the mirror and say, maybe it's time to let the young bloods take over?" The audience murmured actual sounds of discomfort now, not nervous laughter but genuine embarrassment at what they were witnessing. The vibe had completely flipped from morning television pleasantness to something approaching confrontation. Samuel exhaled through his nose, a soft sound, but carrying the weight of a warning for anyone paying attention. He tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on Michael with laser focus. "You really want to go there?" "Hey, I'm just being honest," Michael replied with a shrug, playing at innocence. "Michael, that's enough," Robin said, her voice trembling slightly with frustration and concern, but Michael apparently couldn't stop, ego fully engaged now. "What, I can't ask a simple question? I thought that's what we do here, honest conversation, right?" George shifted visibly in his seat, fingers tightening around his cue cards, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. The discomfort was no longer subtle, it was the dominant energy in the room. Samuel leaned back, his expression becoming unreadable, the calm before the storm that anyone who'd watched his films would recognize. "Honest conversation is one thing," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "But there's a line between asking questions and disrespect." The words landed like a physical blow. The audience reacted with sharp intakes of breath. Even crew members who'd been moving around the set stopped in place. Michael raised his hands in mock defense, trying to play the victim. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold on. I'm not disrespecting anyone. You're taking it too personally, man." The camera zoomed in on Samuel's face, catching every micro-expression. You could practically see the temperature dropping around him, his jaw tightening, his eyes hardening, the unmistakable look of someone who'd just decided that enough was enough. "You're questioning my value because of a number, he said, his voice carrying devastating clarity. "That's not honesty, Michael. That's arrogance. The audience gasped, soft but collective. Impossible to ignore. Someone in the back whispered something. Robin closed her eyes briefly, as if wishing herself invisible, or perhaps wishing she'd stopped this earlier. Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping into that defensive tone that always makes situations worse. Man, I'm just keeping it real. You can't act like age doesn't matter. People talk about it. People talk about a lot of things, Samuel replied with cutting precision. Doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. Robin tried desperately one more time. Gentlemen, maybe we should, but Michael cut her off again, apparently unable to recognize when to stop. No, I'm not done. You've been doing this forever. Sam, maybe people just want to know if you're ready to take a step back. That's all. The air was razor thin now. Even camera crew hesitated to move, afraid to break the terrible tension. Samuel's voice dropped lower, quieter, but every word hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. You know what? Michael, maybe you should learn what respect is before you question someone's worth. It was like the entire studio exhaled at once, a sharp gasp rippling through the audience, people covering their mouths in shock. Robin froze mid-gesture. George looked like he wanted to intervene but couldn't find the words. Michael blinked, clearly startled by the directness, but he hid it behind another forced grin. Wow, he said, shaking his head with false amusement. Touchy. Huh. I didn't realize asking tough questions was off limits. Michael, please. Robin's tone was pleading now, almost begging him to stop. He ignored her completely. Guess it's true what they say, some people just can't handle a little heat. Samuel didn't move, didn't react with the anger Michael seemed to be trying to provoke. His stillness was somehow louder than any outburst could have been. His eyes stayed locked on Michael's, calm, unblinking, dangerous in their complete composure. The silence felt alive, stretching longer and heavier until it seemed like the studio itself was holding its breath, waiting for whatever was coming next. Robin leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling with genuine concern now. Michael, that's enough. But Michael, blind to every warning sign, too far in to stop even if he wanted to, kept talking. Come on, man. Don't act like you're some untouchable saint. Everyone's got to retire sometime. That's life. Samuel's smile was cold, completely humorless. Everyone's got to learn respect sometime. That's life, too. For a moment there was no sound, no laughter, no movement, just that look exchanged between them, Samuel's steady gaze carrying decades of earned authority, Michael's forced grin beginning to crack at the edges, Robin's anxious eyes, George's nervous shifting. It was the kind of moment that makes people remember exactly where they were when they saw it. The kind that becomes television history not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed about character, about dignity, about the difference between having a platform and having earned respect. And then, with one decisive movement, Samuel reached down and unclipped his microphone. The soft metallic click echoed through the silent studio, louder than any shout. The sound technician froze mid-step. Robin's hand flew to her mouth. George's eyes went wide. Michael's grin finally faltered completely. Samuel didn't look at anyone as he carefully placed the microphone on the coffee table, not thrown, not slammed, just set down with deliberate finality. The soft thud of it landing carried the weight of a door closing forever. Real journalists don't ambush their guests, he said, his voice low and steady but carrying to every corner of the studio. Real journalists don't use their platform to belittle people. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted, everyone too shocked to process what was happening. Then applause started from somewhere in the back of the audience. Hesitant at first, like people weren't sure if it was allowed, then building, swelling into something louder and more definite. Robin's eyes glistened with emotion, respect, sadness, perhaps regret for not stopping this sooner. George leaned back, looking somewhere between disbelief and despair. Michael forced another smirk, his voice dripping with defensive sarcasm. Oh, sure. Walk away. Real mature. Sam. Samuel stopped mid-step, turning his head slightly just enough for his voice to carry clearly. I respect myself too much to entertain this nonsense, he said with devastating calm. You think this is pressure? Michael, this... He gestured around the studio with something approaching contempt. This is just sad. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and heavy, impossible to clear. He straightened his jacket with practiced ease, smoothed his cuffs, and walked toward the edge of the set, not rushing, not storming off. Every step deliberate, calm, radiating dignity, even in departure. The audience watched wide-eyed as Samuel L. Jackson, A man who'd faced down cinematic villains and impossible challenges chose to walk away from something far uglier than any movie conflict being treated with disrespect on live television. Cameras kept rolling because this was live and no one in the control booth could quite believe they needed to cut. Robin called after him softly, her voice breaking. "Samuel, please." But he was already gone, disappearing through the studio doors without looking back, leaving behind absolute chaos, Robin looking devastated, George frozen in shock, Michael sitting there with his false grin slowly crumbling, and an audience that had just witnessed a masterclass in knowing when dignity requires walking away. The applause continued, growing louder, transforming from uncertain support into genuine admiration for someone who just demonstrated that respect isn't negotiable, that some things matter more than promotional obligations, and that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to participate in your own diminishment. Michael's voice echoed across the suddenly hollow set. "So that's it, you're really walking off, proving my point. Man can't handle a little heat." "Michael, stop talking," Robin said sharply, her patience finally exhausted. "You're making it worse." But the damage was complete. The red light on the camera blinked, the show cut to commercial, and somewhere outside the building, Samuel L. Jackson walked away with every ounce of his dignity intact, having just reminded everyone that legends don't need to justify their continued excellence to anyone, especially not to someone who'd confused a morning show hosting gig with having earned the authority to question whether legends should still be working. The silence he left behind said everything that needed saying.